Throughout human history, one thing has been a constant: crime. There are many types of crimes committed and many types of investigators who look into them. Criminals get very creative to stay ahead of the law. Find out crime doesn't pay. Join Jess Nasty as he dissects various crimes, mysteries, and disappearances.
Crime Maze.
Hey, hello everyone! Welcome! My name is Jason, and of course, I go by ESTEY'S Crime Maze. Thank you so much for joining me. I got an epic video if you stay with me, everyone. But before we get into the subject matter, as always, I ask if you think I have value to share with humanity, perhaps, or if you just enjoy my videos. You know what I'm about to say, right? I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you smash that like button and hit the bell icon to be notified for future videos. And feel free to leave me a comment. Of course, I read them. I appreciate the engagement, everyone. And all this helps with the algorithms, getting the videos ultimately out to you guys and gals. Okay? And by the way, this channel is exploding. It's a new channel, and I've already got over 300 subscribers. It's unbelievable. I'm super excited, everyone. And I'm getting a lot of comments. And you know what? Partly why my channel has exploded is I exposed somebody. And I actually, after that, I gave an apology video to this somebody. You know who it is, my friends, who we're going to talk about? It's none other than Jay Embry. That's right, Jay Embry. He's got this big, huge community. I'm sure most of them are good people, even though I got bashed a lot when I exposed Jay Embry. And we're going to get into it. And I got even more bashing, it seemed, on an apology video, no less, that I did. Now, first of all, why did I expose Jay Embry? And then I'll explain why I gave an apology to him. My friends, this is so important, and these will be my opinions. But I think if you really look closely, we got to ask the questions. I want to ask you, everyone, who is Jay Embry? You know, again, he's had all this success. He's done hundreds and hundreds of videos. And if he's going to have success with his channel, I'm not going to condemn him for that. But we got to ask, who is Jay Embry? He comes from the ether. Nobody knew who this guy was, right? And he claims he's all about truth and justice. I'm not sure where he was during COVID. I was a public speaker going against the mandates with a lot of you out there. But that's a whole other subject. I know. But I digress. Sorry, back to Jay Embry, my friends. But he comes from nowhere. And now he's got this huge YouTube channel. And it's all on the Idaho4 primarily, right? Now, why do I have an issue with him? Why am I exposing him? Well, what is his, I will first ask the question, my friends, and you're going to see why I asked this question. Is Jay Embry a disinformation agent? A Fed? Is he working for a 3-letter agency? Maybe the FBI? Maybe another organization or group? Or is he the alpha? As a lot of people even left comments at times saying he's the alpha, right? Don't pick on Jay Embry. He's our man. He's great. And all. They gave him all these gushing high praises. It's unbelievable. I guess his disinformation's working. I mean, and then he'll get some people that give him constructive criticism. Well, they'll say, oh, he's just more of an entertainment channel. But, you know, to each their own. But here's my question again. Is he a disinformation agent? Is he a Fed? Is he working for the Feds? Who is Jay Embry? And why do I say disinformation agent as a possibility, my friends, and asking you the question? Why do I say that? Well, what's he all about? What's his narrative? Well, he wants to free Brian Koberger, right? He shows you that Brian, and he tells you he thinks couldn't have done this crime and did not do this crime. You know, at November 13th, 2022, Idaho4, right, everyone? Where supposedly 4 beautiful young university students were supposed to believe were stabbed in the most heinous, brutal crime scene, blood everywhere, right? That's what we've been fed, my friends. But I would ask Jay Embry, because here's his narrative, my friends. He wants to free Brian Koberger. And that part's great. think Brian had anything to do with the crime. I think he's actually, Brian Koberger's most likely working for the feds as part of this distraction, as I've said in some of my videos and interviews, okay? I think he's used as a distraction. Probably Brian Koberger in some way signed up for this. This is his assignment. But he had nothing, there was no atrocity to begin with. See, this is where I have the problem with Jay Embry, everyone. Is he a disinformation agent? Because all of his supporters, they go along with Jay Embry repeating this theme. The same thing that the FBI fed to us and law enforcement, my friends, and corporate media. He keeps saying that the atrocity happened, that the hit got carried out. And he says it's by the Aryan family, the Aryan Knights. What? So and he has no evidence to support it, by the way, my friends. We'll get into that. So we're supposed to believe, again, the Aryan family, the Aryan Knights, according to Jay Embry, were actually able to carry out this hit. Now, first of all, I don't disagree with Jay Embry where the fact that I believe the students were targeted. And it could have been by elements of the Aryan family, Aryan Knights, or cartel members. And it all has to do with a confidential informant, most likely living at 1122 King Road. Right? I've talked about this in previous videos. Most likely Bethany Funk. There could have been more than one confidential informant. As I've said before, my friends, if you look at Bethany Funk's history, and this has been shown to be true, you can look it up yourselves, my friends. You don't have to take my word for it. But there's no history of her before 2015. I don't think Jay Embry has told you that. But anyway, regardless. I think one of the confidential informants, I think some of the roommates, this is speculation, but I think they probably found out one of the girls most likely spoke too much, flapped their lips a little bit, and they endangered some of these students in the house, my friends. And the feds absolutely knew those 4 students were targeted. Absolutely. Come on. And yet Jay Embry, my friends, again, he's putting it out that the Aryan family, the Aryan Knights, were able to do this hit, right? Get out clean, and they left 2 roommates alive. Does that make any sense, my friends? If you're perps, whether it be Aryan family, cartel members, or the gangbangers, right? Are you going to leave 2 roommates alive? Come on. I don't think so. Especially that are living in the house, right? That was seen and heard everything going on. And the 911 call we know was delayed for 8 hours, as everybody also has been asking why. Why did Bethany wait at least 8 hours, right? And had friends do the 911 call, all this. But Jay Embry's explanation to you is, everyone, that he thinks that, one of the gangbangers intimidated Bethany and Dylan, is basically what he says, so many words, to make sure that they didn't call 911 for 8 hours. Are you kidding me? This has never been heard, I don't think, ever in history, my friends. And I don't think it's ever been done in history. No way. I think what makes a lot more sense is if this was an extraction removal operation by the feds. And I absolutely am convinced of it in my mind, my friends, in my opinion. As I've been saying over and over again, it took me about a year and a half to figure this out. And other people are starting to hop on this theory, thankfully, my friends, because there's a lot of validity to it, I believe. A lot of circumstantial evidence to support this. The feds rescued those students. Again, they knew they were targeted. And here's the circumstantial evidence to support my theory, my friends. As part of it, Steve G., Kaylee Gonzalez's father. You won't hear this from Jay Embry. In 2 interviews, I don't trust Steve G., my friends. I think he's working with the feds. I think he signed a non-disclosure to release a certain amount of information. I think Steve G's job and Christy Gonzalez, in my opinion, my friends, their job now, that's why they're doing all these interviews, doing all the talking. Ethan's family only did like 1 or 2 interviews, right? But I believe Steve G and Christy Gonzalez, and sometimes they bring their daughter into all this, they're actors. They're acting. They have a script, basically, and their job is to put this emotionally charged false narrative to convince you that there was an atrocity, that it happened. There was all these stabbings, and their daughter died, as well as the other 3. In my opinion, my friends, it's a complete hideous lie. All 4 are probably protected under the WITSEC program, which is the Federal Witness Protection Program. The feds went in cover of darkness. They knew, and here's the evidence, my friends. Steve G even admitted in 2 interviews. Sometimes he says too much. He probably shouldn't have said this. He admitted that the feds had surveillance around the house, my friends. And we know they had patrol. They had agents in the neighborhood and on the ground. And remember, my friends, the feds were psyching themselves up for a major drug bust that we know happened about a month later in Washington State. So they knew there was probably a confidential informant working with the feds to help them with their criminal investigations, whether it be a Bethany Funk. I think Kaylee Gonzalez very well may have been a confidential informant as well, my friends. And so if a confidential informant is compromised, obviously the feds, this is what they're trained to do, my friends. These federal programs actually exist like an extraction removal operation, right? How could perps, how could the Aryan family or Aryan Knights, how could they get in, do this big operation, stab 4 healthy people to death when there's surveillance around the house and you got feds patrolling the area, my friends, right? You can't do it, I would argue. There's no way. But Jay Embry, my friends, he tries to convince you, in my opinion, because he said, well, he thinks that they just had enough security to make the parents feel more comfortable. That's basically what he said. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, that makes no sense. Okay? And Jay Embry, he may be correct, and others when they say a lot of people speculate that, yeah, Xander Canoodle's stepmom and her husband, I think it's Karen Norlington, the stepmom, they very well may have been confidential informants because they were trafficking drug, right? They seem to got deal after deal, as Jay Embry and others show you in the court docs. They got all these great deals, right? They should have done some hard jail time, right? But anyway, so they very well may have been confidential informants. And they may have snitched on some gangbangers, on elements of the Aryan family, Aryan Knights. That might be true. But what I don't believe is true, my friends, and there's no evidence to support that any Aryan family, Aryan Knights, or any other perps actually successfully did a hit on 4 students. That being Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xander Canoodle, right? Ethan Chapman. For example, everyone, this is why I challenged Jay Embry to do an interview in part, my friends, because I'd ask him the hard questions. I would ask Jay Embry, well, you've done hundreds of videos, literally putting out there that this atrocity happened. Again, following just the FBI largely narrative, right? So, and yet, where is the verifiable evidence that the bodies were removed, Jay Embry? What do you think his answer would be, my friends? Can he come up with any evidence? Do we have any evidence of the verifiably that the bodies were even removed? There was nothing, my friends. We didn't see tarps, right? The feds didn't even try to fake moving out the bodies because it never happened, I believe, my friends. And no pretrial evidence, verifiable evidence that the bodies were stabbed or anything like that. That's unheard of, my friends, right? We should have had pretrial evidence by now on this, my friends. Okay? And some people will say, well, Jason, they'll make a good point. They'll say, well, the coroner made a public statement, that happened, Kathleen Babbitt, right? Well, that's true. But she, in my opinion, she had to make a public statement, and she's just working with, unfortunately, a very corrupt system. She's following a script, and people pick apart even Kathleen Babbitt, rightly so, right? Because very oddly, she explains Xander Canoodle's behavior, fighting back, she claimed, right? Then she goes on about Kaylee Gonzalez claiming the wounds don't match and all this, my friends, right? But again, there was no autopsy leaked photos, my friends. And even in the hearings, didn't we learn that there was at least one corrupt cop at the autopsy? Again, Jay Embry, I don't think tells you any of this, my friends, that he should, right? And in the hearings, we learned the papers just disappeared, the reports on the autopsy. These are huge red flags, in my opinion, my friends. But you know what I would focus on more if I got a chance, if Jay Embry had the courage, if he would show some balls and let somebody like me interview him. But he doesn't do interviews. That's another red flag, in my opinion, my friends. A guy like Jay Embry, right? He puts hundreds of videos out, and yet you don't spend your time interviewing other YouTube creators, especially people that may have an opposite viewpoint, to show you circumstantial evidence that, for example, well, wait a sec, Jay Embry, there's no evidence that the hit even got carried out. There wasn't any atrocity. This is an extraction removal operation, or at least say it in my opinion. But see, Jay Embry, the only interview that he's ever done, and that I'm aware of, my friends, he interviewed A.R. Hayes of Convict's Thoughts. And A.R. Hayes just goes along with the FBI narrative that this atrocity took place. Although, A.R. Hayes also is convinced that Brian Kohlberger, I think he's pretty convinced that Brian didn't do the crime. Anyway, but again, my friends, Jay Embry goes solo. Is this part of being a disinformation agent? At least in Jay Embry's case, my friends, that he goes solo, again, trying to convince you seemingly that this atrocity took place, but yet there's no evidence for it. Why won't Jay Embry interview somebody like me, or I'll have him on my channel, and let's see if the audience agrees with this narrative you've been putting out, Jay Embry, especially when I show the audience connecting the dots and showing real federal programs that the feds do extraction removal operations at times, especially if a confidential informant has been compromised. And here's the other thing, my friends. Another thing I would show you, the audience, with Jay Embry in an interview, but I'll tell you now, my friends. Did you know, get ready for your socks to be blown off or your hats, or if Jay Embry hears this, maybe Jay Embry's glasses will be blown right off. That's another red flag in my opinion, my friends, that this guy wears shades all the time. In every single video, except for one video, apparently he showed his eyes. And one woman who just loves Jay Embry, it was so hilarious, she left a comment basically saying he has beautiful blue eyes. I saw his eyes. He showed his eyes in one video. Whatever, right? But anyway, no, but really, my friends, one of the main questions I would ask Jay Embry is, I would also say, I would get into the staged crime scene. Hello, Jay Embry. Just open your eyes, man. It was a staged crime scene. They didn't treat this like a biohazard. But to my knowledge, my friends, Jay Embry refuses to discuss any of that. He won't tell you that what we all saw, that many of them didn't even wear proper PPE. The forensic scientists, right? Half the time they didn't have gloves on or their slippers. Same with the law enforcement, the U.S. Marshals. And you know what else he won't tell you, my friends? But you better believe I'll bring it up now, as I've done in previous videos, and I would bring it up in an interview if only Jay Embry had the courage, my friends. And if he wasn't a disinformation agent, maybe he would agree to this. At least I think he is a disinformation agent, very possibly. No, but what I would say to Jay Embry is, about the staged crime scene, I would say, Jay Embry, why haven't you discussed with your audience or actually let somebody interview you, go back and forth, bouncing ideas off one another? Never mind about the one with A.R. Hayes, but why don't you get into the nitty and gritty? As part of this staged crime scene, in my opinion, is the boxes. Hello! It says North American Relocation Services on it. Birdie found that out with his researchers, my friends. Yes! And some people might say, well, yeah, that sounds really odd, North American Relocation Services. But you know what, Jason? It's a moving company, and they are moving boxes out. You know, they're moving the victims' things. Well, first of all, wait a second, my friends. First of all, what's really odd, too, is you've got local uniformed officers, PD and ununiformed officers, moving victims' things out. When do you ever see that? That's very, very unusual. But more importantly, my friends, North American Relocation Services, and I mentioned this in my recent videos. Guess what? This is so important. The parent company, Birdie found this out. The parent company is called CERVA. North American Relocation Services actually work with the feds, my friends. Yes, just look it up. I'll show you on the screen, man, my friends, all about CERVA, S-I-R-V-A. Just read about it, my friends. They do relocation extraction operations. They got a Schedule 48, for example, which allows them to, they literally remove valuable, law enforcement assets like confidential informants, etc., people that are maybe helping them in a criminal investigation or, in a trial, etc. They will or federal government officials, my friends. They'll remove, a federal government official, for example, that is in danger, with their lives in danger. And this would apply to confidential informants as well, my friends. This is a real company, CERVA. And again, you got North American Relocation Services. Again, Jay Embry, shouldn't he be telling you this, my friends? But he refuses to go there. You gotta ask why. Instead, again, his whole narrative is, this atrocity happened. I think it's the nice area family. They did all the stabbings. And are you kidding me? No way. Again, surveillance around the house. Patrols. The feds knew exactly what was going on, my friends. And again, they were preparing for a major drug bust. So they knew most likely they were absolutely working with a confidential informant at 1122 King Road, my friends. And if Karen, again, back to Xander Canuto's stepmom, for example, my friends, and or husband, they would have absolutely known if they did snitch on elements of the Aryan family, they're not going to just provide a little bit of security to make the parents feel more comfortable. They would be keeping an eye on those students, my friends, 24/7. Come on. And they would have had wires in the house. There's actually circumstantial evidence that they probably had some of the rooms wired. The feds, my friends. And why wouldn't you if you got a confidential informant, putting their asses on the line? So again, I don't think there's any way perps could go in and do these atrocities, my friends. And you got 2 roommates left alive that you still got to explain for? Come on. And a delayed 911 call? The feds, my friends, as I've said in my videos, I think reason, logic, common sense. Wouldn't you agree? The feds most likely debriefed Dylan Bethany and, Bethany Funk in no uncertain terms, either the night of or this could have been pre-planned, and they would have absolutely told them in standard operating procedure for the Fed, they would have said, do not call 911 for at least 8 hours, right? Makes a hell of a lot more sense to me than assailants, somehow communicating with Dylan Bethany, intimidating them to the point where they're not going to call 911 for 8 or 9 hours. Come on. So anyway, my friends, again, Jay Embry does not, to my knowledge, he will not talk about the staged crime scene. The only thing he even does is he'll talk about a coerced 911 call. That's it. I mean, come on. Right? So, and again, Serva, my friends, they got that Schedule 48. This is the parent company of North American Relocation Services. And on the boxes, guess what, my friends? I could show you right now. Bertie found out that boxes say Beth on it for Bethany, one of the surviving roommates. Isn't that bizarre, my friends? I mean, this is crazy. It was a staged crime scene from the get-go, I believe, everyone. Right? It's a huge psyop. And again, Jay Embry, my friends, he'll never tell you what a psyop is. You notice this? All these, I believe some of these disinformation agents out there, etc., controlled opposition, they'll never tell you what a psyop is. Remember, I've defined that before, my friends. A psyop, think about some of Steve G's statements, okay, and his behavior and especially corporate media, putting out this emotionally charged narrative, the cover up, everything, my friends. Again, I don't think the atrocity happened. Think about all this information. A psyop, by the way, it's known by many different terms and names. You got psychological operations, hearts and minds, you may have heard as well, right? And propaganda, okay? There's 3 types, by the way. You got tactical, operational, strategic. And I'm going to keep defining what a psyop is from time to time, my friends, because it's so important. But Jay Embry's not going to educate you on this all-important aspect, I don't believe, everyone. And a psyop is any activity that's practiced mainly by psychological methods with the aim of elucidating or evoking a planned psychological reaction in another person. Think about Steve G, some of his statements, and Christy Gonzalez, my friends. In my opinion, I think Steve G looks like a Fed and he acts like a Fed, just like Bertie said. There's a lot of questions about Steve G and now the wife, in my opinion. By the way, my friends, I don't believe Jay Embry will ever play this clip, by the way, that Bubbly Waters found out from Christy Gonzalez's own lips, my friends. She literally said Maddie bought a new house. She blurted it out, obviously probably by mistake. Yeah, this is crazy, my friends, right? I'm telling you, the students are alive. But anyway, back to a psyop, my friends. Another way of saying what a psyop is when you take selected information and indicators to an audience to affect one's emotions, value systems, belief systems at times, and or objective reasoning, right? That can also involve perception management. That's what a psyop is, everyone. And it can be targeted, of course, to individuals or groups, right? And by the way, the military, we know, conducts psyops all the time. They're trained for this, but so are law enforcement, my friends, the police, right? When you interrogate somebody, for example, you're often, invoking some sort of psyop, whether it be tactical or usually a strategic psyop, with somebody maybe to influence their objective reasoning to try to usurp a confession. This is, again, my friends, it's so important, I think, to really understand and grasp what a psyop is. And I truly believe it applies largely to the Idaho4 case, my friends. I think the feds largely did a tactical and operational psyop, for example, and they did literally a strategic and tactical operational psyop, but a real extraction and removal of those students, my friends. They had to do it. They knew that on November 13th, that night, my friends, right? And remember, think about what Kaylee asked Maddie. She said, what did you tell Adam? And Maddie said, I told him everything. You better believe the feds most likely already knew that, my friends. And that was just more of an impetus, I believe, for the feds to remove those students. But we're not being told the truth, my friends. It's up to us to figure this out. So I disagree with Jay Embry, my friends, and I think he knows better. Jay Embry should absolutely know better by now, shouldn't he, my friends? We're in 2025. But he keeps repeating, I believe, a lie. He's trying to, again, I think he's almost like trying to put it in your subconscious, isn't he? He keeps saying that this atrocity took place. Well, show us the evidence, I would say, Jay Embry. Where's the evidence, man? Again, no verifiable removal of these bodies in the first place. It was a staged crime scene. I could go through a whole list, my friends, and I would in an interview with Jay Embry. And we'll do it in future videos regardless. And I've gone through the list in an interview recently, my friends. There's so much evidence, my friends, to show you this was a psyop, I believe. This is a huge cover-up, not just on the Brian Kohlberger end. Yes, Brian Kohlberger is most likely totally innocent of everything to do with the Idaho4 largely, although I think he was working with the feds. But again, my friends, there wasn't any atrocity 1122 King Road. Jay Embry, in my opinion, he's lying to you, my friends. And if you connect the dots, I think it's clear that there was an extraction removal operation. These students are likely protected under a WITSEC program, Federal Witness Protection. Now, some of you may have been asking during this video to yourself, well, Jason, when are you going to explain why did you do an apology video to Jay Embry? Those of you that may have not watched it yet. Well, I simply apologized to Jay Embry because I was trying to show some intellectual integrity and honesty. I had the courage and the balls to do it. I admitted where I was wrong because in one of my videos exposing Jay Embry, actually, I thought and I said in so many words that I was almost convinced that Jay Embry never talked about the WITSEC program. And yet I found out he did a video on it, which it just talks about the basics of the WITSEC program. But nevertheless, it was some very informative and maybe educational information as well, I think. So I even played his clip for you guys and gals to hear, okay? I tried to do the right thing, and I gave him an apology video. But we got to ask, my friends, I believe, if we really want to know the truth, who is Jay Embry? Is he a disinformation agent or fed? Who's he working for? Is he really solo? Is he really the alpha male that some people want to believe? I would like to believe it too, my friends. But let's use reason, logic, common sense. We got to ask, why is this guy pushing out that the atrocity happened, yet he shows no evidence? All he does is, my friends, he'll show you clips of the operation out front. There was an operation. There's no doubt about that. But where I disagree, my friends, he's trying to convince you seemingly that those are assailants. He thinks they're assailants. One supposedly cocking a firearm of a gun, and if you believe the audio, right? It sounded like the firearm of a gun. And you got somebody at the dumpster, right? At a certain time, and Embry will show you the timelines as other people have done. Somebody sitting in their car out front all the night of this so-called atrocity. But I would argue, my friends, reason, logic, common sense, most of these were feds, right? Absolutely. They were conducting a psyop. But Jay Embry won't tell you that, my friends. He's all fixated to tell you that he thinks this is all the assailants. At least 3 assailants now, he claims, did this atrocity. I would say horse shit. Excuse my language. Absolute nonsense. And he knows he can't prove it, my friends. Okay? Nor can the FBI. Okay? And again, I think it's all likely that this was a stage removal operation by the feds, my friends. And again, we could agree to disagree. Those of you out there, feel free to leave me a comment. But I truly believe that, my friends. And again, who is Jay Embry? I thought a lot of the conversation, if I recall about a year ago or less than a year ago, a lot of people were even claiming or thinking that Jay Embry is an FBI agent or asking the question. A lot of them also said, well, wait a second. It sure seems like Jay Embry has like a drug task force or some federal background. We got to ask that too, I believe, everyone. And maybe I even know more information than I'm letting on. There's certain things I'm going to hold to my vest here, everyone. But remember when Jay Embry, remember my friends, he claims he knows about drug interdiction teams. Didn't he say that in so many words, my friends? Because remember when Brian Kober got stopped twice on the street, Jay Embry even admitted to you that he knew that these were drug interdiction teams, he told you. How did he know? How did he know that? And that's how they operate. You know, saying how they will stop somebody, especially say if it's two males in a car, you know, things like that. So, you know, anyway, I'll just put that out there. So that's what I want to do this video on, my friends, respectfully and yet firmly exposing Jay Embry again and asking some hard questions of this guy. And I challenged Jay Embry in the first video, even exposing him. I said, you know, Jay Embry, let's do an interview. If there's anything you disagree with of what I've said about you, let's do an interview. Let's bounce our ideas off one another, especially on this case of the Idaho4 and the evidence that I think leads towards that this was an extraction removal operation done by the feds and that the students are probably out of the country. And you can agree to disagree, Jay Embry. Show me why I'm wrong and other people are wrong in that theory. And why don't you show us again, Jay Embry, where is the concrete evidence, though, of your theory that you keep putting out that the atrocity took place? You've done hundreds of videos with that. And the Aryan family, no less. The Aryan family, Aryan the Knights, you know, took this atrocity out. And obviously were successful, according to Jay Embry. They got out clean, apparently. Are you kidding me? No way, my friends. These students, and this, I believe this extraction operation removal theory, my friends, I think it should be celebrated. This is good news, my friends. The students are alive. You don't have to feel demoralized and sad anymore, in my opinion, about the families largely. You know, even though it is somewhat sad, I guess you could say, I will add a qualifier, because the parents will probably they may never see their young adolescents ever again, my friends. That's right. If they're protected under WITSEC, which I think they are, the parents will be lucky to ever see them again, my friends. And that's very sad. But it is what it is, my friends. It's a hell of a lot better reality than, you know, thinking that the students were stabbed to death. And again, my friends, I would tell Jay Embry, there was no open casket public ceremony for any of the 4 victims. Again, huge red flags again, I think, everyone. Only Ethan Chapman's family supposedly had a private funeral service, but it wasn't an open public casket ceremony. And some people might just say, well, that's just a coincidence, Jason, or ESTEY'S crime maze. Maybe. But if you connect a lot of these dots, my friends, I think it's just one more data point that shows most likely this was an extraction removal operation. And by the way, my friends, before I go, please listen carefully. Did you know, my friends, that Jay Embry will never tell you this? He's never told you yet, because it goes totally against his theory, that the feds legally, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, they can legally stage a violent event if a confidential informant has been compromised. Hello? Did you know that, everyone? You don't have to take my word for it. Look it up, everyone, if you want, okay? That's a fact. Let me repeat that, my friends. This is what I meant to say earlier if I didn't say it already. That's why I thought maybe it'll blow Jay Embry's glasses off too, right? Half joking. The feds can legally stage a violent event if a confidential informant has been compromised. Hello? Doesn't that apply to the Idaho4 most likely, my friends? I think it absolutely does. These federal programs, again, really exist, my friends. This is part of the WITSEC program at times. The feds will rescue students, but you didn't hear that as part of Jay Embry's narrative, my friends, even in the WITSEC video that he showed, even though, again, some good information. But because it's all FBI papers, the FBI, apparently, they don't want you to know, by and large, that, you know, the feds can stage violent events, right, everyone? But this is a real reality. It happens, my friends, right? And false flag operations happen. So I think we need to discuss this. I think it's important, my friends. Thank you so much for diving into the Idaho4, everyone. There's a lot of great researchers out there, and there's a lot of great YouTube creators that are trying their best. And I respect a lot of them, even though some of them I don't agree with, others I do. You know, I got to give credit to Bertie again, my friends. He was the first one, as I've said before, that connected a lot of these dots to the extraction operation theory. And my buddy Tommy Jude as well at Once Upon a Crime Time. And he interviewed Bertie too. Tommy Jude has put this theory out several times, but especially in an interview with Bertie. They did a great job together, my friends. And I just had an interview with Tommy Jude, by the way. But back to Jay Embry, my friends. Jay Embry doesn't talk about these things, does he? And he does not interview other people, except for one interview that I know of. To me, these are huge red flags, my friends. And especially with his huge community, why don't you start branching off and doing interviews, Jay Embry? Have people ask you some hard questions, see if you can answer. Huh? See, I don't think he has the courage, my friends. And just as importantly, I don't think he's assigned to do that. I think he has an agenda. I think he very well may be working for some organization. I'll just leave it at that. I think he very well may be a disinformation agent. And if that's correct, that they're telling him most likely, don't you do interviews, especially with other YouTube creators that are going to expose you. That's just my thoughts, my friends, and my opinions. Let's just put it that way. Okay. And Jay Embry could prove me wrong. He could prove all of us wrong. But I don't think he'll ever take a chance on interviewing me. And as a matter of fact, my friends, Jay Embry, some people think he's got class and good character. Actually, a lot of people think that, apparently, that support him, right? Well, I think he didn't show any intellectual integrity and honesty when it came to somebody like me that was telling the truth on this guy and asking some hard questions like I'm doing today, my friends. This guy, when he responded to my apology video, or wait a sec, he responded to me exposing him. I don't know if he responded to my apology video, but anyway, he didn't even mention my channel's name. I think he lied to you. He tried to put on like he said he didn't remember my channel, and he apologized to people out there. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. Maybe I'll remember his name at the end of the video. I'll try to remember. Are you kidding me? It was up on the big screen in big letters, Jay Embry, when it came on your feed, as you said. Again, my friends, it's so ridiculous, Jay Embry, in my opinion, to do these things. But you know what? It is what it is. I don't need Jay Embry, but you know what? I'm not done with this guy. And I'm going to give you my opinions, and I think the facts largely back it up. And again, we got to ask the questions. Who is Jay Embry? Do we want disinformation agents to do you just want to buy into the information that's spewed off certain agendas by disinformation agents out there, my friends? For example, if Jay Embry is a disinformation agent, are you just going to go along and believe everything he has to say, my friends? Again, he can't show you, for example, any evidence that the bodies were removed or that an atrocity even took place, my friends. No, he can't. He's just trying to convince you, those seemingly, that there were assailants out front. No, those were feds most likely. They extracted those students. The hit never got carried out. But Jay Embry, my friends, is somebody telling Jay Embry to put this narrative to try to convince you that a hit actually took place? Think about how hideous that really is, my friends, and how much power that potentially gives to elements of the Aryan family, Aryan Knights, right? Because who's going to want to snitch if you believe that elements of the Aryan family, Aryan Knights did this atrocity? People are going to be scared to death to actually release, valuable information to help the feds, my friends. Come on, in criminal investigations, right? And let's give credit, as I've said many times, my friends. Even though I expose some of the lies, I think, of the FBI and the feds at times, and many of us have, but let's give credit where credit's due. I think the feds did their job, my friends. Like I said earlier, I think they extracted these students, my friends, and they are trained to do this. Okay, everyone? So let's at the very least, let's entertain this as a real possibility. Don't you agree, everyone? And I think it's likely happened. And just look, it was a staged crime scene, everyone. You can't deny it. Okay? Again, Jay Embry, he'll tell you the 911 call was coerced, but he doesn't go into the actual staged crime scene. And where's the raw crime scene leaked photos that mainstream media always gets, my friends, especially nowadays, right? They almost always get leaked raw crime scene photos, not to mention autopsy photos. But there's been none of that, my friends. You got to ask why. Well, I think it's because there wasn't any atrocity likely, my friends. Isn't that reason, logic, common sense to infer from that with no leaked crime scene photos? Hello? But Jay Embry doesn't tell you that, my friends, right? So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, everyone. I think I've said enough. I really appreciate you staying with me on this video, my friends. And many more videos to come. I promise, everyone. And I'm really excited. I got an interview coming up, hopefully with Birdie very soon. Maybe by the time I put this video up, maybe I will have already been interviewed by Birdie. We're supposed to do it before July. Hopefully it will happen, my friends. I really respect a lot of Birdie's work, and his friend Phoenix, one of his researchers as well. And like I said, my friends, I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence when you connect the dots that yes, there was an extraction removal operation done by the feds on November 13, 2022, and they extracted those 4 students. And when you get all these YouTubers, so many of them, try and convince you supposedly that an atrocity happened, that they believe an atrocity happened, for example. No, they're incorrect, my friends. And some of them I believe are lying to you on purpose. There's no evidence that an atrocity took place, my friends. There's more evidence that the feds were lying to you about that as well, in my opinions, my friends. Okay? Anyway, again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. I hope you might subscribe. Again, smash that like button. Speaking of smashing, I would love to have a boxing match with you, Jay Embry, another challenge to you, if you're up for it, and we'll raise money for charity, just like I said in my video in exposing you. And let's do an interview together, Jay Embry, if you're man enough to do it, that is. Huh? Let's see. Anyway, again, my friends, smash that like button, would you please? Hit the bell icon. You'll be notified for future videos, and feel free to leave me a comment. I read them, and I hope you might even share this video. Thanks, everyone. And you look beautiful, by the way. You really do. Jay Embry, though, I'm not sure if he looks beautiful. The guy, you can't even see his eyes. I mean, come on. Is that another sort of Fed? Does he look like a Fed? To me, he sure does. But anyway, but you're entitled to your opinions, of course, out there, everyone. But I showed you, and I talked about a lot of the things that Jay Embry should be talking about, in my opinion, that he doesn't. It's almost just as important, I believe, what he doesn't tell you as what he does. Anyway, enough said. You look beautiful, by the way. Have an amazing, spectacular morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, my friends. Take care. Thanks. Bye.